John Light, L-I-G-H-T, Worrilow, W-O-R-R-I-L-O-W, 303 East Locust Street, Lebanon, Pennsylvania, 17042-5519. My blood type comes later, J.L. 16 East High Street, here in Lebanon, on April 25th, 1921. Born at home. And our maternal grandfather owned all of that property. It was a development which he called the Heights. And that was one of the higher points, but new in Lebanon at that time. So again, that whole area, as a little boy, I used to ride horseback because it was a farm, my maternal grandfather's farm.
That you sit on the board for the Water Authority. How long have you done that?
Since January 1972, and this is what, January 2004, so that would be what, 32 years, I think, you know.
So you were on the board during the Agnes flood?
Oh, yes.
How did that impact your water operation?
Well, of course, the Agnes flood just overwhelmed all of us in every respect. We were taking people out of second floors in canoes and rowboats and so on. But the net result of that was to build these, I'm not sure, they don't call them sluices, but these concrete, where we direct the flow of the water to accommodate a recurrence of what they call a 100-year flood. In other words, a flood that you can expect, whether it's 100 years or more. If you go to 4th Street, and you're on the Quittapahilla Creek now, the Quittapahilla Creek bisects the city of Lebanon. And starting there at roughly at 4th Street, just a little bit east of 4th Street, you'll see a small waterfall, about 6 to 7 feet high. But downstream from there, beginning at 4th Street, that's when the concrete banks that provide for the flow of the Quittapahilla all through the city to its city limits at 16th Street and even beyond. But at the same time, it's that was the result of the Agnes flood. I'm not sure I ever heard a dollar figure of the expense or the damage to of the Agnes flood to this community, but it was very substantial. And so the greenway, the pathway that runs alongside of the Quittapahilla Creek through these concrete walls.
I kind of recall a story where initially they were also cementing the bottom.
No, you're not allowed to. State law doesn't permit you to.
So there's no concrete on the bottom at any point in that?
I don't think you're allowed to. And I think that's a state requirement or regulation. That has to be natural exposure to the soil. I would need help from, let's say, Ed Keener or others if they can identify someplace.
In retrospect, was that still the best thing to do? Put up those concrete walls?
Well, of course, we have not yet had the experience where it tested the system. If you want to know what that meant, go to Simon S. Kettering, that's the northeast corner of 16th and Cumberland Street, stand at their counter, and just to your left, you'll find at the height of 6 feet, that was the height of the water at the peak of the flood. And when you look over that wide expanse of open space, the volume of water was completely unprecedented here. And that moved that, was it a chicken place, but moved it off its foundation, so there was, water has that almost unknown force. Well, we lost 2 people, as you probably know, in that Agnes flood out there at the help me, where you cross the, on 72, when you cross the Swatara, pardon me, the...
Frog's Hollow?
Yeah, that's right, the father in the Jeep with the son, what, 10 or 11 years of age, and the force of the water going over the bridge, that unknown to them or not, they weren't experienced, washed the Jeep away. The father was lost. The son, happily, aged 11 or something, grasped a branch of a tree and was able to be recovered. So he was not lost, but his father was. But the other loss was a man who was trying to get to the Jonestown area, I think, to help his mother. And they put a rope around his waist, with the understanding that if he went across, if he got into trouble with a rope around his waist, they would just pull him back and he would be out of trouble. The problem was they didn't realize the force of the water under those circumstances. He got halfway across, signaled that he couldn't make it, he wanted to be pulled back, and they tried as hard as they could. They were unable to pull him back, and he drowned. Again, people should understand it's almost beyond measure, the strength of water under those flood conditions. You can't afford to test it, because if you lose, you've lost your life. Those are only two deaths that I'm familiar with in the flood Agnes in all of Lebanon County.
What about the opposite extreme? What about the droughts?
Well, let me just go back to one
Okay.
thing, because I believe I overlooked it in answering your question concerning the effect of Agnes. The effect of Agnes that was very important, it flooded the Bethlehem steel mines at Cornwall. And so they found it, the estimated cost to put those back into operation was so overwhelming. I think even their equipment they left down in the mines untouched, but the point was, the loss of jobs, if Bethlehem Steel no longer, don't forget 1742 is when those mines began to produce iron ore. And the furnace out there at Cornwall, that stopped in 1883, but here they shut down the mines completely, and therefore they've never been reactivated. They've completely lost. So the impact on this community was so very widespread that in terms of jobs to be, Mel Lipinski of Lebanon Building Supply, he was the last manager of Bethlehem. Charlie Neal out there at Rexmont, he would be very knowledgeable in terms of giving you much more detail in terms of employment and which mines and did what and so on. But the point was that was no longer a source of revenue or productivity for Bethlehem, the Bethlehem mine. Of course, we've had several droughts. I think we've had 2 out of the last 4 years or something. To me, I think I've told you this before, but when I was teaching underprivileged youngsters to water ski over at Long Level to me is on the Susquehanna River between Columbia and Wrightsville. Now that bridge is about a mile long, crossing the river there, but there is that placid water area, very large expanse, and there you could water ski, and to take these youngsters who of course didn't belong to the country club or the Quentin Riding Club or these other sources, but to take them over there and teach them water skiing, as long as we had already taught them to swim, the impact, when you ask me the effect of the drought, the most dramatic impact that I can remember personally is to see large tanker trucks coming from York, Pennsylvania, right up to the water's edge in a drought, severe drought, filling those tanks with water, raw water, right out of the Susquehanna River, and taking it back to York, Pennsylvania, because people need water, and you have to meet that demand, no matter what the drought conditions are. But those were extreme, because ordinarily the water, as you know, is tested and constantly and for so many different elements and requirements, but the need for water dominated when those tanker trucks took raw water out of the Susquehanna and drove back to York, Pennsylvania. That made a great impression upon me about the water is right next to oxygen, I assume, in terms of sustaining human life.
I know when there's a drought, there's warning stages and things like that, and you encourage people to conserve water. What can people do to conserve water?
Well, number one, even without a drought, I think we Americans are all so spoiled. We consume water, and you'll have to help me. The figure I have in my head is 50 gallons per family per day, and I think now they've increased it to 65 gallons. Rule of thumb is the consumption. But if you're talking brushing teeth or shaving or all those sorts of things, we don't want to trespass in personal hygiene, I don't think. But At the same time, to me, the remarkable contrast between the African woman barefooted in a colorful skirt who has a jardiniere on her head in Africa, and she has to walk a half mile to the village pump or a well or something and walk back, and then the way we do what we do, whether it's watering lawns or washing cars and so on, but even pure waste, such as letting water run when we're brushing teeth, etc. So our experience, I think, and I need help because I want to be accurate, but when you sound the alarm and they do cut back a little bit, it's about 5% saving, which is not very dramatic, I don't think. Now, as you point out, they have various stages, and fortunately, oh, I never did tell you, the Quittapahilla Creek, see, almost all the water we draw comes from Seigrist Dam. Now, the reason for that is the water comes by gravity. If it comes by gravity, it's been in the reservoir, so it settles out, and you don't have the electricity pumping cost or the chemical cost to treat the water. When you take water from the Quittapahilla Creek, then you have those costs, and that's an additional cost. So if you look at our record, you'll see today, especially with the Seigrist Dam, and especially with the rainfall we've had in the year 2003, I don't remember so much moisture in any one year. But there, happily, our costs have been limited because of the gravity flow, which is most economical. On the other hand, I should have mentioned that when the drought conditions occur, then depending on the extent of it, we take water from the Quittapahilla Creek to supplement what we get from the Seigrist Dam, and so the source of water, and as you may know, when water is treated at the wastewater treatment plant, we have what they call tertiary. Mr. Nixon, in his time, we had to put in tertiary treatment. So that water, which goes back into the Quittapahilla, which again it flows into the Quittapahilla, but that water is said to be drinkable and has been drunk by people. So without harm and so on. Bet Schultz and so on made a splash with that. But the point is, in terms of drought, American people as a group influenced only by the severity of the shortage. Even in the most optimistic times of severe shortages, I think the state thinks 20% is the most that you could ever get from saving. Actually, I don't know that we've ever tested that. To my knowledge, we've never reached that kind of level of saving. But whatever your question was, I think the answer is there is so much more we can do, but it's common sense. People who put the dishwasher on when it's not filled, you know, that's electricity, but it's also, I'm not sure, you have to help me, I think it's 35 gallons for a dishwasher to operate. And depending on what toilets you have, you know, depending, every time you flush your toilet, it could be 7 gallons unless you put a brick in the tank or whatever. There's these sort of shortcut measures, but there is much that we can do only when the crisis reaches where it did in the oil crisis back in '73, when, you remember, oil went from $3 to $30 a barrel or something like that. That's when the impact in terms of your gasoline prices, that's when the Americans learn to pay attention because it reflects in their pocketbook.
Because you're close to Fort Indian Town Gap.
Yeah. The state police, others patrol that area. We also tried to get the National Guard in terms of what training or something to be a little more mindful. But in terms of severe, stringent, new requirements, we have not reached that level.
Let's go back to, I call it the Worrilow Mansion, you call it Brasenhill. I noticed when I visited there with Kai Skov that there's a pool in the backyard. Was that your swimming hole, or did you ever swim in the creeks, or?
Well, no, that Kai Skov built a swimming pool there.
Oh, did he? It wasn't always there.
Oh,
okay.
No, no. Now, we moved in October 1, 1930, and of course brand new, and we were born almost across the intersection, not quite, but our property was just across the intersection. But that was all part of my grandfather's property called the Heights, My father paid $2,000 per parcel, 8 parcels, $16,000, to buy that property from his father-in-law to build Brasenhill. Well, that started in 1927. But my father's last bill, and we heated and we cooked with gas, and the 3 gas furnaces in that property, so large that each had to have its own room in the basement of that house. And the total cost of those 3 carrier furnaces, the last bill paid by my father from Carrier Corporation in York, Pennsylvania, for all 3 purchased and put in place, $600. And at that time we had an agreement with the gas company that we would pay them $150 a month for gas. And in June, at the end of the heating season, we would sit down and find out if we owed them a little money or if we had a little credit. And I have shown all of the material that my father's archives. I pass on to Kai Skov, because when I shove off, I don't want everything to go to the landfill, but I want him to have the bills. When I showed him the bill for that year at $1,150, he said I paid about 3 times that today for just 1 month, let's say January, a cold winter month. So the whole thing has changed. But the most expensive item in the building was the Foxcroft stone, and that came from a quarry near Philadelphia. And that Foxcroft stone, quarried, brought to Lebanon, and built. In other words, the house, the stone wall, and stone walls, the total cost for that Foxcroft stone, the largest bill of all, was $26,000. And the architect, Donald Robb, Frome, Robb, and Little from Boston, Massachusetts, who went on then and was an architect in helping to design the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. But Donald Robb, who was a boyhood friend of my father's, but we found, and we never had any emergency. We never had a fire or robbery, burglary, or anything of that sort. But that beautiful home, which of course is a treasure trove of memories because we all grew up there, and the Worrilow children were evenly divided. But my parents had their beautiful quarters, and then my sisters on the 2nd floor each had their own bedroom, each had their own sleeping porch. There were quarters for the governess, for example. And my brother and I shared the 3rd floor together. We each had our own bedroom, our own sleeping porch, sort of an indoor sleeping porch, not outdoors. And just beautiful facilities. And we had a billiard room, we had a squash court where the architect had cut glass apparently, so we used it as a ping pong. That's where my brother and I did battle in ping pong in the basement. But even there, we had a laundry chute. And so the cook, the maids, all the help would gather because that was before washers and dryers. We bought 5-gallon containers of soap from the chemical company in Reading, and then they would line up, and they had these wash tubs really fixed, and we had a mangle to do the sheets, for example. We even had a drying room in the basement, so that if it was foul weather outside and we didn't have dryers at that time, then the laundry was hung up in the drying room, which of course didn't have the sunshine. No central air conditioning. But later on, they put a very large fan up in what we call the unfinished attic, and it's a stone home. So that in the summertime, of course, the heat of the day eventually brought the heat into the house. But then at night, when the sun had set, the cooler hours, then we would close much except to get a through draft. In other words, a few windows open, and then turn on the fan. That would suck all the heat out. So that was the response to but wonderful individual, what shall I say, cutting edge designs, screens, where you just press 2 buttons and the screens would go up. So you didn't have to take screens in and out. The beautiful front hall, fashioned or designed after Haddon Hall, the great country home in England. and the guest room at the top of the front steps where I would post myself when Mr. Hershey would come to dinner, watching for his 1935 Chrysler Airflow, driven by Fat Tice, who used to work for us at Lebanon Steel Bounty. And then when I would see them come down, Walnut Street, I would go racing down the steps crying, he's here, and then I would be there at the door to take Mr. Hershey's coat because he always had a box of bonbons, chocolate candy that they made at that time. And then he would, of course, when Mr. Hershey came for dinner, we children would have our meals with the governess in the children's dining room. We were not invited to eat with our parents. But when Mr. Hershey or special occasions, then we were invited. I always wanted to sit next to Mr. Hershey because I really had quite a high regard for him. But then Fat Tice, the chauffeur, and we had fed him dinner in the children's dining room. And so after dinner, when my parents would take Mr. Hershey into my father's library, I would ask the governess if I could go back to Fat Tice, who was having dinner in the children's dining room, and then I asked the cook and the maids to make sure he had plenty to eat, because then I would ply him with these stories about Mr. Hershey that he would tell me that would not be known to the public. And it was he to whom I said, Pat, I don't know Mr. Hershey well enough to make this offer, but would you please tell him that I'm available for adoption if he's willing to restore my weekly allowance from 10 cents to 25 cents. So that was just a longer story to that. But anyway, I'm not sure Mr. Hershey ever got the word, but obviously the adoption never took place. But Brasenhill has many, well, you should know that under that tile roof, completely copper-clad, all of Brasenhill is completely copper-clad, so that the tile, even if one tile eventually came loose after many years, Chi-Scope will never have a leak in the roof because the copper itself in that house has great value. Now it's a 4-car garage attached to the house, but above where there was a bedroom for the cook, there was a bedroom for each of the 2 maids, there was the butler's area, which was separated, an apartment overlooking Walnut Street, but that was all converted to apartments, and that's where Mark Ferry lives, and his wife before her death. The apartment complex above the 4-car garage, but and Kai also has Michael, the baker from Poland. He's down in the basement. I'm not sure whether it's in the squash court area, but the billiard room, which of course is an important place for us as children, where we played, where my brother and I got boxing gloves for Christmas, and he of course was older and bigger and so on, but when we put on our boxing gloves, and I was of course intimidated, but he said, hit me, oh, you can do better than that. So I struck out, and he had a temper like his mother and father, and so he struck back and knocked me out, and next thing I knew, he was running back and forth with a cup of water trying to revive me before my mother and the governess, skeptical with the silence in the billiard room, came running down to see what had happened. So that has some countless memories, that Brasenhill experience, including the landscaping. It's just a beautiful property, and it's adjacent to the Quinn property. See, the Quinn home was built, stone house was built in 1923. I think the garage in 1915. But again, with the relationship, and the Quinns owned the tennis court across High Street, where they were generous enough we all learned to play tennis there. But we had of course, family relationship, but we were all roughly the same age and had well, we have photographs, we have motion pictures, I should tell you, of Bert Spangler, our chauffeur, for example, who in our 1927 Lincoln limousine, costing $7,500 we still have the receipt, and but then he would come and pick up the Quinns and our other relatives, and see, my mother had 4 sisters, and the Worrilow children, and bring us all to this church, Zion Lutheran Church, for Sunday school. And we have 16mm motion picture films, a wonderful film library, and birthday parties when my father, with some influence apparently, would block off High Street from Lincoln Avenue, from the High Street, First Avenue to Lincoln Avenue, on High Street, and then we would have our bicycle and tricycle races down the street.
Back to what I originally asked you, I gotta ask, now we are talking Milton Hershey, the chocolate magnet.
Yes, oh yeah.
Just for clarification, in case anybody listens to this later and wasn't quite sure.
He was 20 years older than my father, but he would go to New York, and they both stayed at the Waldorf Astoria, which was new, built in 1932. But then if they happened to see each other in the lobby, they'd have lunch or breakfast together, I guess. But then they would, from time to time, but it was a big occasion when Mr. Hershey came. We had to really be on our best behavior, and but we were so fascinated by him. And we made some, well, I have an article here somewhere where we were interviewed by the Hershey newspaper or something. This is some years ago when my brother was still with us. And so we told him, my brother made some, he was a great racket, skilled in tennis, squash, and he made some suggestions to Mr. Hershey, which he incorporated in his community building, when they built the community building, which I'd say was 1935, 34, 35, I'm not sure. Go ahead.
Okay. My question initially was, did you ever swim or fish in any of the local waters?
I think we follow our fathers. He was not a fisherman or an outdoorsman and so on. So to answer your question, I've never fished. But what was the other, swim?
Swim.
Well, when I was in the mayor's office and dealing with those underprivileged youngsters, then I would take them, and there's a tree, which I believe I could find, on the Quittapahilla Creek. And there they could swing on this branch of this tree or the vine or whatever it was. Of course, it didn't cost anything. It did cost them. Some of them couldn't afford. Well, when I walked the streets at that time when I was in the mayor's office, and I found these naked youngsters standing under the pool, the water that was being discharged from the Gingrich Memorial Swimming Pool at Coleman Park, built in 1940. And they couldn't afford to go in and pay the swimming, but here they were at high noon. Of course, they were sort of hidden, but cooling off by standing and letting this water be discharged. They were naked and so on. So that's when I realized these youngsters can't afford to belong to the Y. So that's when I was on the Y board at that time. Took them in and taught them swimming and life-saving every Saturday morning, plus recreational swim from 6 to 9 before the YMCA then had its regular program. But they couldn't afford it. Those are the ones I took to teach water skiing over there at high level, etc. But that was in the YMCA. So other than to take them up, and because I was a merit badge counselor in swimming, life-saving, and so on, I just stood quietly at this site on the Quittapahilla where they would swim, of course, at no charge.
Well, where did you learn to swim?
I think it was Lebanon Bathing Casino. Now, if you go out Oak Street, it later became the roller rink, Lebanon roller rink. But Lebanon Bathing Casino, it cost us a dime to go in there. Now, if you were modest and had the money, you could pay a quarter. If you paid the quarter, then you got a little cubicle with a little canvas, so if you're undressed and so on, you could hang it. But we didn't have the money, so we paid a dime. You could swim all day for that dime, but then you took your clothes off and had your swim trunks and so on. Lebanon Bathing Casino, that was the only thing that was available at that time, other than the creeks that you're referring to.
Tell me, I know I used to go roller skating at the casino before it burnt down, and I kind of remember where the pool might have been, but was that like concrete walls around a creek? Or how was that filled?
The creek went through there.
The creek went through the pool?
Yeah. Well, I was too young to even be interested in that sort of thing. In other words, the pool was there. I don't remember, and I can hardly believe that the creek went right through the pool.
It didn't
pool.
feed the...
It had to be controlled in some manner, I would think, but I don't really know what the mechanics were.
Okay.
I do know that there on West Oak Street, there used to be a bridge, well, wiped out by Agnes. At that time, the trolley line went from Lebanon up to Hershey along the south side of Oak Street. And for instance, and the milk, the Hershey company, had their trolleys pick up milk from farmers, so they would take it to the trolley station. And yet, at the Lebanon Country Club, established in 1920, 19 at that time, then in the early 30s, Mrs. Buckingham built the second line at her expense to accommodate Isabel Freeman, Senator Freeman's daughter, who was a keen golfer. So that was known as the new nine. But the coming in, because the caddies, who have to pay a nickel to go in a trolley car, but the golfers, including my father and my uncle. My uncle had a 1932 Packard convertible and had a rumble seat. And so he came in one time, always offered these caddies rides to save them a nickel. But then he told me to climb in the rumble seat, and we came in, and he was pretty sporty with that 1932 Cadillac, Packard convertible, or roadster they called it. But we came down that hill. That house is built in 1795, the one just west of the bathing casino. But we came down there, and he hit that, and I went out of the rumble seat, and the caddy next to me happened to catch me by the leg, so I didn't, I wasn't injured. But I've never forgotten that. And that was wiped out by the flood, and now, of course, they have that new bridge, and no problem. But Lebanon Bathing Casino. But then when we went away to school, swimming was an important part of the educational program.
Okay.
But at those very young ages, I think it was probably the Lebanon Bathing Casino, or maybe even the YMCA.
Yes.
We cleaned out the Quittapahilla every June, and I would rally those youngsters. Well, we just start at where I said before, 4th Street, at Falls, and then we had the 2 oldest canoes from Camp Bayshore, because they were so old. Nobody was allowed to ride in the canoes, but no bare feet. But the youngsters, scouts, Cub Scouts, and so on, and we had the one canoe and that crew start at 4th Street and go down to 10th. There's a ramp from the Quittapahilla, and then Ed Keener would provide dump trucks, and so on the Saturdays that we do this. Now, the McDonald's, the first McDonald's, because I was in the mayor's office at that time, so I got to know that fellow very well. So he said, look, because McDonald's contributed a great deal to the refuse, people throw their cups and their plates and so on into the creek. So he said, look, you bring them down, clean up the creek, and then come on into McDonald's, and we'll give you all a Big Mac and a soda and French fries or whatever. So I said, fine. So we did that on a traditional basis for many years. The city city limits west, it's 16th Street there. McDonald's is just a little bit east of that. But then help me, the one that comes in, the branch from South Lebanon, along Elm Street. Elm Street, they used to flood if there was a cloud in the east. But it's a double name, Hazel Dyke. The Hazel Dyke came in there too, and fed into the Quittapahilla just upstream from McDonald's. But that's when we would get these youngsters, of course, and have the second canoe at 10th Street, and we filled that by that time with, the most unusual was a parking meter, but we got shopping carts and batteries and tires and so on. It was always worthwhile, because we'd pile them up and let the youngsters look at what they had done, and then they, of course, would go in, and the McDonald people would then fulfill their commitment, and I even had Cub Scouts saying, can we do this every Saturday, Mayor? Because they got a free Big Mac or whatever.
What didn't I ask you that you feel would be useful for us to know about the Swatara watershed?
I think really commending you personally, but all the people who are associated and support you, but your initiative, and really we cannot afford the luxury of discouragement. I think in this community, with the privilege that we should all identify with, that we associate with just living or having been born and reared anywhere in the Lebanon Valley, so that the concern I have is a decision to do nothing is still a decision. So whether in the mayor's office when we were talking, to my disappointment, of a north-south and an east-west bypass around this community, today the cost is probably prohibitive. So now they're working with a railroad overpass at probably a sum of money in far in excess of what it would cost us some years ago, 40 years ago, for a north-south, east-west bypass. But the demand for water is so obvious we don't have to discuss it. But what troubles me, I think, is our concern that the understandable positions of the environmentalists, we respect them, we understand their position. The misunderstanding or the disagreement comes simply on what is important. The need for water is so obvious. The only thing that's unknown is the time in which the lines cross, the need for water and the water available, if you understand me. Population is going to continue to grow, and at what appears to be an increasing pace. Look all around us, development, whether it's residential or whether it's industrial and so on. The need is so clear. 2020 looks as though it's far away. For something, a measures of this dimension, it is tomorrow where we must undertake, thanks to your leadership and your appreciation of the sense of urgency here. I think those of us, maybe through too much zeal, but we hardly think it's too much zeal, but there is really no room for discussion or debate that this is coming and it's not far away. Gannett Fleming thinks it's already here in terms of drought. But it takes us so long. We spent $17 million to expand the Christian E. Seigrist Dam, and that's a very large sum of money. But it doesn't accommodate the needs of tomorrow. And so, in terms of the urgency, and to me, a very compelling cause for which there is no discussion, no flexibility, even time frame, we feel this very urgent. A secondary issue, which you and I have discussed many times, is the recreation. Because if the dam is, you have to help me, 575 acres, and comes within 1.25 miles, or 1.5 miles of the Camp Bayshore property line, I wanted to use it to teach sailing. That's a whole new dimension for Lebanon Scouts, to teach sailing. You can't teach sailing on a 5.5 acre pond at Camp Bayshore. 575 acres of water, you can teach sailing, and that would be a secondary issue. But overriding that, without a question, is the human requirement for water under all conditions, and that is so clear. We have trouble with our frustration with those whose position is certainly valid in their mind, but can hardly persuade us, it's hard for me to even comprehend that position when the time for decisive action, we can't afford to dance the hesitation waltz because the cost is so prohibitive, and the delay, again going back to the tank trucks, the raw water at the Susquehanna River. You can't place your people in that position, and the political leadership that you represent today, happily, has to continue to be undiscouraged and undeterred and undistracted, but continue to what I think is support our position, which is your position and mine, but I realize is quite different from those who oppose the reservoir as the Swatara Creek watershed, which a dam, that burst in 1831, exactly at the same site, physically the same site is the dam that we seek today, not for the same purpose, because that dam was to provide water for the Union Canal, but still the purpose is more compelling today because it's to provide talk quality of life. If you've got limited talk drought conditions and what you cannot do even today under severe drought conditions, that should not be, in my view, difficult to comprehend as to what it means tomorrow, even though we take the stringent measures that we've never displayed up to now, never demonstrated that capacity to understand, in my view. My sermons aren't usually this short.
Oh, John, this has been delightful. We've covered so much territory.
Well, I think it's
taken up a lot of your
random.
time.
No,
but we are just so grateful.
Well, we've been talking about this for so long, and I feel guilty. I'm especially guilty that we haven't, I haven't done, but we've been through this church with this interim pastor, and now he's ill, and so on. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do.
Thank you, John.
Look, I'm not Joella, thank you. Kit, do I pronounce it correctly? Okay. We thank you for your kindness. I hope you save the best shots.